Contemplative outreach has always been based on the foundational piece of service. As Father Thomas says, the God in us serving the God in others. Many of you may be familiar with the vision statement of contemplative outreach and the theological and administrative principles that were articulated. I'm not going to read them all. But the one theological principle I would like to speak of in terms of our next speaker is number 11. Following the teachings of Jesus, we exercise leadership as service, especially being alert and responsive to the growth and needs of the spiritual network of contemplative outreach. The woman who is about to speak to us is the representation of that principle. She came to a mountaintop in 1983 with a bunch of other courageous seekers. And at the feet of our teacher, Thomas Keating, her heart opened. A woman who was a mother, now she is a grandmother, but who worked as we do out in the trenches, but followed the call. In 1986, she was asked to take on this fledgling executive directorship called Contemplative Outreach as Mary Merzowski moved into Chrysalis House. And she said yes. It was part-time. You couldn't support yourself with this, but it was a call to say yes, ever responsive to the needs and promptings. As the network continued to grow, so did the executive directorship. As one person shared, their first meeting with Gail was at her dining room table, which was contemplative outreach. It then progressed to the one-car garage behind her house and was continually remodeled until that was finally outgrown. And the position became full-time. Eventually, we have a suite of offices at 10 Park Place. It sounds very fancy, doesn't it? Especially in the New York, if you're like me, New York is New York, but this is Butler, New Jersey. And as the new millennium came, the needs of this network, which have grown to over 50,000 in 22 countries, took the whole leadership to a new level, where Father Thomas, as chairperson of the Board of Trustees, was called to our global transformation, and Gail Fitzpatrick-Hopler accepted the position of president of Contemplative Outreach Limited. Gail is a woman who, if you ask her how this all happened, would say, I pray, and she does. Our model in service is always to be faithful to the practice and let the Spirit do the rest, which the foundational theological principle, which we numbered 13, I don't know if anybody noticed, is we acknowledge that any good accomplished by contemplative outreach is the work of the Holy Spirit. So I introduce to you a woman who is the model for contemplative outreach service in being open to the Spirit and serving the God in us through the God in her, Gail Fitzpatrick-Hopler.
Well, good afternoon. We are the body of Christ. So it's so nice to be a member of that body, all of us together in union. We don't have to really talk too much about how we're going to embrace our unity because we're already there. Just like Thomas was talking about that this morning and saying we already are in our basic goodness. It's just that we don't know it and we don't recognize it. So some of the boundaries and the blocks that we see or that we experience on our ordinary level of existence are really just on the ordinary level of existence. But the truth of where we really live is at that extraordinary level where God is and where we all are and where we really come from. So I'd like to just do a short little reading here. It's just tiny. In silence, learn to give of yourself, forgive others, live with gratitude, and then you need not seek inner peace, because peace will find you. Mary mentioned our vision and our theological principles, and we've taken a long time to really flesh this vision and principles out. And it's really become a way of life for many of us. So I'd like to I will read the vision statement. Mary said she wasn't going to read it all, and when she said something about it, I thought, oh boy, Mary's going to do that, and then I'll stand up there for half an hour and do nothing. Or maybe we could have another period of centering prayer, which would probably benefit us all a great deal. So let me just read the vision. It's really the wisdom statement of contemplative outreach. It's who we are, why we are, and how we go about being who we are. Contemplative outreach is a spiritual network of individuals in small faith communities committed to living the contemplative dimension of the gospel in everyday life through the practice of centering prayer. The contemplative dimension of the gospel manifests itself in an ever-deepening union with the living Christ and the practical caring for others that flows from that relationship. Our purpose is to share the method of centering prayer in its immediate conceptual background. We also encourage the practice of Lectio Divina, particularly its movement into contemplative prayer, which a regular and established practice of centering prayer facilitates. We identify with the Christian contemplative heritage. While we are formed by our respective denominations, we are united in our common search for God and the experience of the living Christ through centering prayer. We affirm our solidarity with the contemplative dimension of other religions and sacred traditions, with the needs and rights of the human family, and with all creation. So you can see it kind of unfolds. We start out with why we are, and it just kind of opens and opens to include the whole of creation. So it's a pretty big vision, I would say. And we've taken these years to really begin to live into that vision. And we're called to continue to let go and to move into that particular vision so that we can become it. We can really become the creation and the loving, unified people that we are. Contemplative outreach from its very beginnings was ecumenical in scope. We've always embraced everyone. And in fact, we never figured out who's who. We didn't say, oh, you can come only if you're Catholic, or only if you're Episcopal, or only if you're Baptist. We never asked that question. It never occurred to us. Only recently, we did a little survey. And the reason we did the survey was because we were looking for writing grants and stuff like that, because we're a not-for-profit organization. And somebody asked us, how many different denominations do we serve? Well, you surely must have tracked all that. And I said, whoa, uh-oh, we don't have that information, because we don't have that consciousness. That isn't where we come from. Yes, Father Thomas is a Roman Catholic, and I'm a Roman Catholic too. And this centering prayer practice came right out of St. Joseph's Monastery in Spencer. It's the contemplative prayer that they developed there. But it doesn't belong to us. It belongs to all Christians. They just happen to be the vehicle the delivery system. The monastic tradition has really carried silence and solitude and simplicity of life over the centuries. So it belongs to everyone. And we never thought of it as dividing it up and seeing, what is our portion of this pie. It just was, so we welcomed everyone. We welcomed all seekers. And it became a little laboratory for, that idea of transcending the day-to-day activities of our crazy world and looking at what really the benefit and the fruit of centering prayer is. It brings about from its simple little roots. When we sit there and we do this practice for 20 minutes, it feels like we're doing nothing, in a sense. It's so tiny, 20 minutes twice a day, 40 minutes in a 24-hour period can bring about such powerful changes. Such powerful changes. I believe that contemplative energy is far greater than nuclear energy, because it has a way of seeping in, because it just secretly seeks into the hearts of human beings. And the more human beings that are practicing centering prayer and other silent practices, where they give themselves totally and completely to the presence of God within them, the more this particular kind of energy seeps into our planet. So we have a very big vision, and we have a very big job ahead of us. But if we all cooperate, and if we all do it together, it's only a 40-minute commitment, day after day. But it accumulates. It accumulates. And the more united that energy is, the more it puts into the universe unity. Because the ultimate goal of centering prayer is to be in union with God. So it doesn't have a divisive component. It moves toward oneness and unity. So it would be very hard to start dividing things up, when in fact the very nature of the prayer practice itself is about unity and being one piece, one whole body. So the contemplative attitudes that we don't find in the world today, the contemplative attitudes of friendliness, gentleness, meekness, love, peace, and all of the compassion. We don't really hear about that too much on the nightly news, do we? We turn on the bad news and we hear it. All the things that are happening in the world. And we feel quite impotent. What can we do? What can we do? And I've had so many people say that to me recently. What do we do? But the only thing we can do is allow God to transform our hearts, bring about peace within our center, so that we can illuminate and walk around and be little light beams for peace in the world. Because there's nothing else we can do. We're rendered completely helpless and out of control in a situation like this. It's way bigger than we are. But the energy of contemplative prayer is way bigger than all of the wars and all of the craziness that goes on. So we have a secret tool. And we have a whole network of people that are involved in it. And there are many people who practice silent prayer all over the world and throughout, over the centuries, really. People have been doing this, right? So the more we completely give ourselves to it, the more we'll see the fruit of those contemplative attitudes in our life. And they come directly out of the practice itself. We ever so gently return to the sacred word. So what do we teach ourselves? Gentleness. If you repeat the sacred word during your period of centering prayer 5 times, 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, However many times you return ever so gently to your sacred word, you impose and insinuate gentleness on your being. And it helps to undo all of that violent stuff that we take in just by walking around in our planet and absorbing some of what's going on around us. When we don't use the word, the sacred word or the sacred symbol, in a gentle fashion, but return rather brutally, what do? We insinuate that on our own self. So it teaches us how to be gentle. This little teeny practice teaches us how to be gentle. And I think if you look deeply in your own heart and your own experience of centering prayer, and even those people who haven't been doing centering prayer as a practice, but you've had a couple of experiences today, that you may even look at how that practice went and whether you were really returning to the sacred word in a gentle fashion. Were you being loving and kind and gentle to yourself? Because the violence that we experience outside of us is really the violence that we also do to ourselves, because it comes out from within us. So the way we can turn toward peace and gentleness and kindness by first starting with our own hearts, by being gentle with ourselves through the practice of centering prayer, through the practice of whatever silent prayer you choose to do. We have several of our principles, and one is while we are formed by our respective denomination, we are in our common search for God. So there's a common search for God that we really tap into. You know, it's just to tap into. There's something more. There has to be something more. It's not just, is this all there is, kind of, you know? There's those songs, there's all kinds of things written about these experiences. So there's a deep knowing, a deep inner knowing that there's more to life than meets the eye. So this is a way kind of in there to find out, what is it? What is it? And I particularly like the idea of that nonviolent approach to ourselves by insinuating the gentleness. I think that's very powerful at this particular time in our lives. And how to be compassionate toward others and understand that, you know, they're coming from all different experiences. So we transform ourselves, and in turn we transform others and transform the world by just being willing to let God take over our lives. So we surrender. We completely surrender. In some of our longer retreats, we offer retreats and workshops on centering prayer, and we have people come together for prayer and silence and solitude in every various configuration. And often I've heard people share when they first get to a longer retreat that they've arrived in a rather frenetic way. You know, if they've been traveling and going through security and doing all that stuff, and they arrive at a retreat and they're kind of worn out. And they sit down and they start to look around and they start to judge everyone who's there and say, oh wow, she looks like she's gained a little weight. And that one looks like she's, you know, maybe she's on a diet or whatever, and wonder what's wrong with so-and-so and so-and-so. And they hear this interior dialogue going on, criticizing and being very critical and looking around. And then at the end of the retreat, we have an opportunity sometimes to share, and you sit down and you look around the room and you don't see any of that anymore, because it all goes away. Because in the silence you begin to hear how critical you really are. You know, that false self that Thomas was mentioning, and you just kind of let go of it. And the more prayer you do in community with these people, the more oneness you experience on a very deep, deep level. And Thomas Merton was talking about ecumenism. I read an article about that, and he was talking about ecumenism, and he said, we can get into all kinds of denominational conversations, but we're not going to go anywhere that we really have to get together on the level of religious experience, or a deeper, beyond the boundaries of talking and thinking. We can't think through these problems, because I think if we could think through them, we would have done that by now. You know, we can only be them. So that little kind of laboratory or little experience at a retreat where you come together and, you know, you bring your vault self big time, because you can't go anywhere without it. You can't leave home without it. Because it is who you are, it is who I am, it is who we all are. But when you experience the silence for 10 days with other people, and you share that deep silence, and you don't really talk and activate your intellectual thinking, you kind of let go of that for a period of time. All you feel is the love and that oneness, the embrace that Thomas was talking about this morning. Everyone in the whole room is embraced in the environment of this safe and sacred place. And during the course of the time, all of the trappings of the false self sort of dissipate. They disappear. And you look around the room, your eyes filled with tears, and you can't believe how much you love everyone in the room. And I could see some of you shaking your head. You say, do I really have that much love inside of me? But that's all there is. That's all there is. Love, and it just comes pouring out. And I understand completely why Jesus said, love others as I have loved you. That unconditional love that pours out in an experience that we have in a retreat setting. So in 10 days, if it can transform, I feel like if it could transform me and if my friends who are, you know, just as wrapped up in the false self as I am, in 10 days of this, you can feel that enormous love, that you're floating on that ocean of love from the Spirit of God. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could really talk everyone? We could never talk everyone in the world to do this, could we? We'd have to be it with others. And I think that's what we do. We have to beam it out, and we have to be a presence. So all we have to do is really be present to the presence of God in our own hearts, and allow that to connect with others, and then we can bring peace to the world. Because peace is in our hearts at that point. But you know, I noticed something else at one of these retreats. It seemed as soon as everyone started talking, they put on their false self just like you would put on a jumpsuit. You know, you could practically see them climbing into it. It was like they checked it at the door, and then all of a sudden they'd start talking, and, you know, I don't know, all of a sudden it became something else. The love that was welling up in our heart, the tears that were welling up in our eyes, when we looked around the room and we just were sharing with that kind of gazing at one another, disappeared when we started to put on our false self jumpsuit. So I think it has something to do with thinking and talking and all of that. So somehow that silence is really, really, really way more important than we realize. So that little secret room, to go into that secret room and to develop the interior capacity for silence is really critical. And it's very critical at this particular time in our evolution. Contemplative Outreach has a kind of a delivery system for this silence. and we have, you know, retreats and workshops and so on. And as Mary said, we have people all over the world at this time. And it's really mushrooming, just like mushrooms grow overnight. Like one day there's nothing happening, and then all of a sudden the next day there's something happening, or a lot of something happening. So I think this is seeping into our planet, and I think we're going to see more and more evidence of it. And maybe it's because of the eyes that I'm looking at it from, or the eyes that some of my friends are looking at it from. But I think we have something that's really very quite powerful. And it's just something that we like to share with others. We're going to have a panel in a little while, and we're going to discuss a few questions. And you're going to hear not just from me, because I've had some I have some things to share about my life and how it's transformed my life as the centering prayer. But, you know, it's nice to hear from other people, and they're going to be coming up to the stage in a few minutes, and we're going to share about, you know, they're going to share their own experience. So it'll be kind of a dialogue of people from various denominations, so that you can see that this whole centering prayer commitment really does transcend the boundaries of the denominations.